but it is, in fact, the end of the school year. And I got an email finding out that I got this piece, it's big, 161 pounds, the pedestal component, and then the piece that's sitting next to it sits on top of it. It's not on there right now because that's kind of dangerous the way it's situated. And I need to get it to an exhibition in Japan. I've got to design and build a crate for it. That's what we're doing. So today is get the measurements figured out, how big it needs to be, and design the crate. For international shipping, you have to either have the wood treated or use laminated wood, like plywood essentially. The crate will be built such that the smaller component that sits on top will be boxed and then placed on the side of the large pedestal piece and then sort of cradled in a internal wood frame. But we'll get to that. All right, so the piece is safely in Japan. So hopefully this video can provide some insight for those of you who might need to ship something fragile or ship internationally or ship something large. It's not a tutorial per se, but the insights provided should help you out if you have to do one of your own. And so the start of the project would be the start either way, but I can only use plywood, but I'm going to start by cutting the plywood down into the bigger pieces, which are the bottom, top, and all the sides of the crate. It's always a good idea to label your parts as you're cutting them. After all the big parts are cut, I'm going to start to get ready to assemble the bigger pieces. I'm going to be using wood glue and brads on 3 of the sides and the bottom. I'm using 5/8 inch thick plywood for this project, but I want the bottom to be a little stronger because it's supporting so much weight. So I'm gluing 2 pieces together to form the bottom, and that's the start of the assembly. I'm simply using my body weight to push the 2 boards together while I brad it in place. Next, I need to create some feet for the crate. This thing, when loaded and assembled, is gonna weigh about 400 pounds, so you're not gonna be able to lift it on your own. So it's gonna be moved around with a pallet jack or a forklift, so you need to prepare the crate to be able to be moved with those tools. So it needs to be elevated with some space underneath for the pallet jack to fit between. Again, this is all plywood, so I've got to cut strips of the plywood to the right size that I'll be gluing up. When making bulk cuts of the same length, I like to set up a stop with a scrap piece of wood and a clamp. It's always nice to measure twice and cut 20 times. You could use 2x4s for this if you were shipping domestically. That would be a lot faster and easier, obviously. But as I said, we have to glue up these pieces next. Also, I'm making these feet a little bit wider so that I don't have to worry about bracing the bottom like you would see on a pallet, where there's strips of wood at the top, but also at the bottom just to hold everything together. The surface area and the wood glue should be strong enough to hold these. After I made the feet, in order to be able to shoot the brad gun up through the bottom and into the sidewall, I need to be able to do the walls before I put the feet on. And so the next step is to frame out the sides with extra plywood so that there's more surface area for glue in the end for the brad. As I was putting the sidewalls up, I pretty quickly realized that I needed to orient this in a different way. You can see as I'm starting to add the brads, the gravity was fighting me the whole time, and there was way too much leverage at the top and I couldn't get it clamped and straight. And so I finally realized that I needed to change the direction of the piece and sort of set it up on its side while I was connecting the back to the bottom. Then after the sides and the back of the crate were put up, I attached the feet. So I'm attaching 2 long strips to either side, and then instead of a long one in the middle, I'm just adding 2 short pieces, one to the front and one to the back. And the thinking here was I didn't want a connection to the ground in the middle of the crate, because that could potentially, if set down hard or dropped quickly, could send a shockwave up into the center of the ceramic sculpture, and that could potentially crack the piece. So I want the plywood to be loose, or I want the plywood to be free to capture shock in the center, and that all of the force would go up the walls of the crate if set down hard. Next is to prep the crate for the door, which is going to be inset. So I need to create a little lip for the door to get attached to. I'm measuring out how deep it needs to be set and then drawing a line with a T-square down, and then I'll glue up a strip of plywood to attach the door to. I just keep using this clamp, moving it up as I'm bratting the strip to the sidewall. I'm also adding a small piece of plywood in the middle of the floor of the crate. That's just so that the center of the door has some place to get to attach as well. I wanted to reinforce the corners of the crate, so I just added a couple little blocks of wood into the corner and bratted them in all directions, as well as added glue. This is probably a little bit overkill, but for the lid, I'm adding blocks to the inside so it fits in really well, and then has a connection on the walls that's not just from the top down, but is also from the side forward. It'll just be a stronger connection for the lid. After we had the primary components of the crate assembled, we moved it up to an area of the studio that had an overhead chain hoist so that we could use that to load the piece into the crate. Before we could load the piece, I added some shock absorption to the bottom of the crate. So that's 2 pieces of white foam and then a layer of cardboard so that the piece wouldn't sink into the foam too easily, and then a couple pieces of acid-free foam on top of that cardboard. Another thing that needed to happen before loading the piece is adding the connection spots for the bracing. So there's strips of wood glued to the sidewalls that will be used to attach the braces for the piece to keep it from moving. After that, it was time to use the hoist and some ratchet straps around the piece to get it loaded. That made the work really easy. The braces were cut to side and prepped for install, so I countersunk the ends of them. And then I used upholstery foam around the wood to absorb shock, and then used the acid-free foam around the upholstery foam and secured that in place with some plastic wrap. The boards were pre-drilled and then screwed into place on the brackets. Obviously, we didn't use glue here because these need to be able to be removed for unloading of the piece. I just need to pause here real quick because I don't have any other footage of the braces that are going across the horizontal. So this one here is attached to the braces that are attached to the sidewall, so that the piece in the middle of that can't move in any direction. And there's also similar braces at the bottom of the piece holding it down. And then I just put a piece of foam on the lid to secure it in place as well. Before you close up the crate, you want to make sure you've included all the requested paperwork and any other information like labels on the work, etc. When I'm screwing the lid and the door down, I'm going to use these finishing washers just so that the screws don't push down into the wood and that they'll set into the wood multiple times more securely. I saw this tip from a video that Michael Alms did on YouTube. I'd recommend watching that. I set the door in place and then pre-drilled it and screwed it into place. Then when I did the lid, I just put I attached a piece of foam to the bottom of the lid and then screwed that down in place. I also add some marks on the lid to make sure it can get keyed up correctly when it's being reloaded. Because the screws that I used came with a little driver bit, I just took that and reinforced the plastic with some packing tape and then stapled that to the crate to make sure that they had the correct driver bit to unscrew the crate right away. And then just apply the external labels to the crate that they needed. And then off it went to Japan. It got picked up and loaded in the truck and then air freighted to Japan. So that was the crate build and what it takes to get a large-scale ceramic sculpture to an exhibition internationally. So maybe you're a ceramic artist and making small work now, but want to eventually maybe make big work. You might save this video for later. So one thing I need to do is decide if I'm going to go to Japan or not, to go see the piece in the museum and in the show, and of course see the rest of the show. And I have to decide this in the next few days. And I'm wondering if you want to see a video of that. So if you do, let me know down in the comments, and maybe I'll take the camera and head to Japan in a couple months.